exploring the bizarre. Your e-ticket ride into the world of the paranormal. Strap yourself in as we traverse the universe exploring the unexplained. UFOs, ghosts, lost worlds, cryptozoology, as well as other dimensions. It's time to take back the night. Now, your electrifying hosts of Exploring the Bizarre, Timothy Beckley and Tim Swartz.
Wow, we're really high up here, Tim. Look, can you see the Earth down there far below?
I can see my house from up here.
Well, your house isn't exactly one of the landmarks we were looking for, but it's a good place to start. Well, there's the Great Pyramid. Look how tall that is. Do you think that the aliens really helped build that?
I don't know, but from here I can also see the Great Wall of China. Who said that you can't see it from space? I can.
Well, and they're the Nazca lines. I don't know what order we're going in here, but there really are some strange figures down there on the Peruvian plain. It's a remarkable manifestation, whether it was done by extraterrestrials or not. I guess we've got a lot of places to visit tonight, don't we, Tim?
Yes, we do. And we're going to see them all from this great and wonderful height, Tim.
Well, it's always good to be high. But, I think before you introduce tonight's guest, we should make a comment here on what I consider to be a very sad news. Now, it's not a passing of a friend like J.C. Johnson a couple of weeks ago, but we have just received word that our longtime trusted and valuable friend and associate, Brad Steiger, is giving up his Smith Corona typewriter and retiring after his next book is published in July on, I believe it is Phantoms.
Yes. It was like Phantoms and Hauntings, and I don't know exactly what the finished title of his newest book will be.
Yeah. Well, I know it'll be published by Invisible Ink. Or is it Visible Ink? No, I guess it's. Well, I hope they're visible, at least in the case of this book. But I've known Brad. I first met Brad in 1967 at the Jim Moseley's very famous or infamous New York City UFO conference that attracted over 10,000 people. And Brad had just written his first paperback book on UFOs. It was, now help me out here, Strangers from the Sky, yes, I believe it was called. And it was a collection of UFO stories. And that was the start of his career. Now, I do think that he had books published before, paperback books. I know he did a book on Rudolph Valentino that was later made into a motion picture. And he did a lot of books that I would put in the same category, like potboilers, like Frank Edwards did, Strange This and Unknown That and Unexplained, so forth and so on. But then he got down to some very serious research over the years. Now, I don't know how many books he's written, but he's certainly the far ahead of anybody, although I think Nick Redford is trying to catch up with him, and you and I are not too far behind. But he certainly holds the record for the number of books on the paranormal. Mm-hmm. And a lot of them, or most of them, have been really very well put together. Brett is a great researcher and a very great writer. I mean, he can turn the material into, well, heck, he's got hundreds of thousands of followers all over the world, and his books have sold millions of copies. So it is just sad to see him, retiring at this point. But we're going to, prod him from time to time to perhaps do a special chapter for one of our anthologies that we put out. And I know how many of Brad's books you must have read over the years. That
Oh, yeah. Well, probably the first book dealing with the paranormal and the supernatural that I ever bought, with my own allowance money when I was a kid was a Brad Steiger book. And then, any time that I'd run across anything that he put out, I would always buy it. So it was especially a thrill for me when I had the opportunity to contribute a number of times for some of his more recent books. So yeah, I'm really sad that Brad is putting down his typewriter, but it's his contributions to this field over the years have been priceless, and I don't know if anybody else is really going to be able to match the fantastic work that he's been able to do.
I certainly agree with you. But tonight we have on two interesting guests, and certainly one of them is right up there as far as being a leader in writing on parapsychology and the occult. I'm not sure exactly how many books she has to do to catch up with Brad's number there, but she certainly is turning out some good quality material. So, Tim, why don't you introduce our guest for this evening so we can continue our road trip here?
All right. Well, it'd be my pleasure, Tim. With us tonight is, we've got, as always, two excellent guests. We have Rosemary Ellen Guiley, who is making a return visit to Exploring the Bizarre. Now, Rosemary is one of the leading figures in the paranormal and metaphysical field. Author, researcher, investigator, radio show host, and publisher. She's written more than 60 nonfiction books on a wide range of topics.
60, all right. 60. That's a good number.
Yeah, including a series of authoritative single-volume encyclopedias. She is often the go-to person for explanations of unusual phenomena and events. Now, Rosemary is a board director and member of the research committee of the Edgar Mitchell Foundation for Research into Extraterrestrial Encounters, and is a board director and book review editor for the Academy for Spiritual and Consciousness Studies. She's a founding member of the Afterlife Research and Education Institute and a fellow of the International Institute for Integral Human Sciences in Montreal. Rosemary makes numerous media appearances and lectures internationally, and she's a frequent guest on Coast to Coast AM with George Norrie, and now on Exploring the Bizarre. Now with us as well is Michael Brein. Michael is an author, lecturer, consultant, and travel storyteller, adventurer, publisher of travel books and guides. He earned his PhD in social psychology with a specialty in psychology, all things travel, as well as an MBA at the University of Hawaii. He has had a career for more than 20 years as a college professor in psychology and business, teaching at a variety of universities in Hawaii, as well as an overseas 2-year stint teaching for the University of Maryland in Europe. I didn't know there was a University of Maryland in Europe. Now, Michael's travel guide series is called Michael Brein's Travel Guides to Sightseeing by Public Transportation, is a first of its kind, showing travelers how to sightsee the top 50 visitor attractions in the world's most popular cities easily and cheaply by public transportation. As well, Michael has been the state director for Hawaii and ambassador at large for MUFON, the largest UFO organization in the United States, with a significant worldwide presence as well. Now, the book that we are going to be discussing tonight, among other things, that Rosemary and Michael has written is called The Road to Strange, UFOs, Aliens, and High Strangeness, which is published by Visionary Living Incorporated. So, Michael, Rosemary, thank you very much for being with us tonight on Exploring the Bizarre.
You're welcome. Glad to be here.
Always a pleasure.
Well, I just, the one thing that I say, looking back at my career and my life, that I would have liked to have done more of, is traveling. Now, I have, been hither and fro, but I guess I would have liked to have spent less time behind the typewriter and more on the road. I mean, I've been to all the popular places. I've been to Area 51, and I even spoke a course at the House of Lords on UFOs, your unofficial UFO group, and been to Loch Ness, and so I've been around. I've been to the paranormal hotspots, but I'm sure that there are a heck of a lot more places to travel to. So now, Michael, let's start out with you. How did you get both the traveling bug and the paranormal bug?
Well, it's really interesting. I was on a career path, doing all the right things, being brought up in the big East Coast city, Philadelphia, working my way up as a top graduate student in the Department of Psychology at Temple University, and on a path to becoming a clinical psychologist. And just at the point when I finished my master's degree, I was offered a 4-year fully paid fellowship to do my PhD at Temple University in clinical psychology. And I scratched my head and I thought to myself, I don't know if I want to devote my whole life to dealing with mental disorders and mental illness, and I thought, oh my God, what is an alternative to this? So I picked up and I walked away from all that and decided I'll go to the University of Hawaii and study the psychology of travel. Of course, my parents wanted to put me in a mental institution right then and there. How could you give up something like this? But I did. I was bitten by the travel bug. I developed a curiosity about what travel was all about. I wanted to do more of it. And I thought I'd rather sit on the beach studying for my PhD exams than be running a mental health clinic in a big, gray, dismal city on the East Coast. And
boy, I would have been right there. I would have been right there behind you, man, in a Hawaiian shirt. I'll tell you that. And my shorts. That's for sure. Well, I think you made a clever and a good decision. So, what was your first trip as far as the paranormal goes? I mean, how did you kind of coast into that?
Well, I was always interested in it. I was interested in the subject of UFOs, and I discovered I was having a few paranormal kinds of experiences in my life. And when I started doing my traveling, I had probably a half a dozen, for want of another term, paranormal experiences in my own travels. So I started to think maybe there's something about traveling that makes you prone to having experiences. Maybe your mind opens up a little bit more as travel seems to be, And so I began interviewing people wherever I could find them. I would sit people down and start recording their experiences, because I thought, well, the best way to really learn about what travel's all about is to ask people, in addition to doing it myself. And so some 1,800 to 2,000 people later, with hundreds of hours of recorded stories, and then asking questions all the time. Well, how did you feel about that? What did you do next? What would you have done to avoid that horrible situation? All of a sudden, I wound up years later with 600 or 700 hours of recorded interviews about travel, and also paranormal events, and also ufology, because I was also having a parallel interest in ufology, and I found myself going to conferences everywhere.
Well, there's so many questions that so many directions to head with this. Well, was there any type of paranormal experience that kind of seemed to repeat itself? And are there spots or areas of the world where you're more likely to have a paranormal experience if you're traveling?
Well, I think the answer is yes, and yes. Let me go on. I found for myself in particular that I've had a couple of kind of premonitionary experiences in my travels. For example, I'll give you two really good cases in point. Both of these stories are in our first book, Rosemary and mine, first book, Travel Tales of the Paranormal and Beyond. I was driving through the Italian Alps, and it was a beautiful day, and the mountains were just fantastic, and there's just nothing like it, as any of you know who've been to the Alps in Europe. But then suddenly I started to get a overwhelming feeling of dread, and lo and behold, as we came around a bend somewhere, suddenly in front of me unfolded what looked like an area of complete disaster, shells of buildings, carcasses of buildings. And then I learned about a year earlier there had been a huge flood that overwhelmed a dam, and it killed about something in the range of 2,000 or so people. I was picking up on that prior to arriving to that scene, whatever the energy was of that. And incident number two, which is equally kind of interesting, I was researching my travel guide to Barcelona, and in order to avoid the horrible traffic and difficulty finding a place to park, I parked out in the suburbs of Barcelona along a busy street by a beach. I thought with good visibility by people, not just isolated down an alley somewhere. And I hopped on the metro, went downtown, did my research, and I started back. And again, it was a nice day. I had a great day, accomplished a lot, felt really good about it. And then I started having this kind of overwhelming anxiety. I don't know how else to put it. And as I got closer and closer to the stop where I was to get off, I just really was so anxious. I just couldn't understand what it was, but I knew to pay attention to it. And I got out and I started down the street to where my car was, Volkswagen bus. And all of a sudden I saw broken glass on the street, and my door was open to the bus. And I thought, oh my God, that was it. It was broken into. But that's the bad news. The good news was a Spanish couple that had been out there on the beach told me that they were going home to have lunch. They heard my siren go off. It lasted for a long time. They took a look over there. They saw people running from my van, jumping in a car and driving off. Well, I had this fantastic alarm system that scared the whatever out of these guys. They didn't take anything and they sped off. But it was clear to me that I had anticipated something really horrible, and it was like that experience in the Italian Alps. And just traveling maybe predisposes you not only to experience, beyond the pale, all the wonderful things we want to learn and personally grow and develop ourselves with, but even at the level of basic security, it kicks in. It kicks in both ends, high end and low end. So those are two examples.
So, okay. And how about, now of all the other cases, you say 1,800 or something like that, does there seem to be any kind of pattern? I mean, this kind of anxiety, would that be high up on the list of the type of people, type of experiences that people would have? And beyond that, what else?
Yeah, I'm sure. People often may refer to it as intuitions. So people have these feelings and intuitions about, being careful what they're doing and where they're going and who they're talking to and so on and so forth. But I felt that people's paranormal experiences covered a lot of different things. I think, for example, we have a story in our book on paranormal experiences of a woman who traveled to Ireland. And for all intent and purposes, it seemed like she was connecting conceivably with something about her being, you want to call it maybe a past life, as some people refer to these things, but she had a special connection with entities, spirits, whatever you want to call them, that seemed to lure her to Ireland, basically, so that she could return and experience some of these really unusual events that took place for her. So everybody has a different expression of it. Some it's survival related, and some it may be related to deeper levels of their personalities and histories and ancestry.
Now, like this woman though, who had went to Ireland, did she have did she go there seeking this type of information, or was it something that hit her out of the blue? The travel experience kind of triggered the experience?
I think she was lured to Ireland. I think people are, in a sense, lured to places where they have connections. Somehow that directs them to some extent to try kind of fulfill a search for meaning and connection that leads them to have some of these experiences in these places. But then I've talked to people that have gone to countries which they thought they had absolutely no prior history of or connection or ancestry, and yet experience the idea of connection with the people and culture and country. So it's unusual. Kind of triggered the experience being in a certain locale. Well, that's a good
we
word,
know what
trigger,
we have, of course. Yeah, well, we have, of course, what we call window areas where UFOs are seen more often, or people are more likely to have paranormal experiences. I mean, did you find that in a group of people that you spoke to who had no immediate connection to a particular place, that there were certain spots, maybe outside of the ones that I've mentioned, where things were more likely to happen than not?
Absolutely. I think people had experiences in their travels which were totally unexpected and totally unanticipated, but absolutely no question about it, a paranormal experience that involved them directly and unequivocally and absolutely. Yes, and yeah.
So would you
Tim,
could you
before,
think of any particular location?
Tim, before you ask the next question, or Michael, before you finish it, we need to go to our bottom of the hour break. So when we come back, we'll continue this conversation, and we'll bring Rosemary into it on Exploring the Bizarre. So stay tuned.
Now back to Exploring the Bizarre with two of the most electrifying researchers in the paranormal, your hosts, Timothy Beckley and Tim Swartz.
Welcome back to Exploring the Bizarre, and I want to encourage our listeners to let us know if you have any questions for our guest. We love to hear from you. We love to get your questions, and, our guests, they love to answer them. So please let us know. Let us hear from you. So Rosemary, let's bring you into the conversation now. Thanks for being with us tonight on Exploring the Bizarre.
Sure.
I want to ask you, how did you get involved with writing these two books with Michael?
Well, it goes back to a long association, casual acquaintance that Michael and I had over the years through ufology, running into each other at some of the conferences that he mentioned. And, that's, we got acquainted that way. And a few years ago, I was visiting family out in Washington State. I'm from the Seattle area. And I put up a post on Facebook about being out in the Seattle area, and Michael happened to see it, and he said, "Oh my gosh, guess what? I live on Bainbridge Island now." And so we got together, and in the course of conversation started talking about all these wonderful travel stories that he's collected over the years. And that's what birthed this series that we're doing called The Road to Strange. And the second book now focuses on a different kind of travel. It's travel into alternate realities, because not everybody's physically on the road when they have their encounter with UFOs or aliens. Sometimes it's in their own backyard. But it does touch on some of the things that Michael was mentioning in the first part of the show about the expansion of consciousness that happens when we're exposed to something different and new, and the kinds of extraordinary experiences we have that in many cases are life-changing. And people who never believed in the paranormal become believers because they encounter something they can't explain away. The same thing happens with UFOs and aliens. And some of those experiences that we have in the second book, they're quite dramatic, and people talk about their transformations, both positive and negative, that sometimes the experience changes life in kind of scary ways, depending upon the nature of the experience. And one of the things that we wanted to do in showcasing these stories, they're all told first person, and then we supplement that with a commentary at the end of every story where we put the phenomena and the experiences into a context. Do these experiences fit other kinds of experiences? What do they say about our interactions with the unknown? And I think that's what really makes the books meaningful for the reader, is it's not just a collection of stories, it's a collection of really compelling stories, but with something the reader can take away and maybe even apply to their own lives.
That's one of the things that's always fascinated me, not only with the stories that you two have brought together in these books, but other similar stories that I've heard through the years. And you mentioned this, Rosemary, is the transformative effect that these experiences will have on a person. And I'm really glad that you brought up that sometimes it's not necessarily, for the positive. That some people come away with it definitely, looking at life kind of out of the side of their eyes. But as you said, there are a lot of people. I mean, they'll have these, and it just it opens up a whole new reality for them.
It certainly does, and these phenomena are around us all the time, and many people can go through most of their lives without ever encountering anything extraordinary, just depending upon their sensitivity. Some people have a natural-born sensitivity to these other realities, and they might be more predisposed to have an experience if they're in the right place and under the right circumstances. But nonetheless, they can be real life changers. And sometimes the experiences challenge people's worldviews, how they explain the world culturally, socially, economically, religiously. And along comes an experience that just really upsets the apple cart. And so then how do people integrate that? Well, I think it's very helpful for experiencers to tell their stories because other people have similar experiences. And when people find out that they're not alone, that it wasn't their imagination, they're not crazy, they're not delusional. Other people are having similar experiences and they have a context and a meaning. I think that helps people integrate those experiences. So the books really they have kind of an educational teaching purpose to them as well as an entertainment aspect.
Do you think these experiences are personal experiences or random events that this person just happened to be at the wrong place or the right place, at the right or wrong time?
It seems to be a combination of both. And it really comes to the fore in the second book on UFOs, aliens, and high strangeness, where the why me factor comes up over and over again. People have these encounters with craft, with lights, with beings, and they feel intuitively that they were targeted in some way or they were noticed and then zeroed in on, and that whatever intelligence was behind the experience, which seemed to be superior to humans, noticed them and responded to them in some way. And so it's like, why me? Why wasn't it other people around me? Did I get singled out? Am I targeted in some way? And for some people, that can be very unsettling because then they start to feel very vulnerable. My own feeling is that, as I just mentioned, that there are many individuals that have a natural born openness or sensitivity to these alternate realities. And they may be the more likely people to have the spontaneous experience if they're in the right place at the right time, or, depending upon your viewpoint, the wrong place at the wrong time. We have accounts in the book where people see something up in the sky and they can't even get other people around them to look up. And if they do, other people may or may not see the same thing. It's a very uneven playing field. And then you've got the ridicule factor, where people talk about their experiences, and especially in the realm of UFOs, and to a lesser extent the paranormal. Experts say that they were hallucinating or mistaken. There's some ridiculous explanation for it. They're derided as country bumpkins or ignorant people. Even their own friends and family don't support many of the experiencers. So it can be a very lonely experience sometimes.
Oh, yeah. The friends and families can be the worst when it comes to trying to talk about a situation like that. I know that the people that have come to me over the years to talk about their unusual experiences, they've just gotten to the point where they've really just kind of almost just shut down because of just the ridicule and just the constant joking and ribbing. They just got so sick and tired of it. And it's like I said, the family can be the worst when it comes to, that kind of abuse.
So that very isolation that you just mentioned then is very unsettling to a lot of people. It can even cause some problems, emotional problems, sleep problems, anxiety problems. People who have severe experiences even suffer some of the symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder. So finding a community of other experiencers, even just through a book where the other experiencers are unknown to them, can be very validating and reassuring. And of course, there are many support groups, especially in ufology, for people who've had marked experiences. But it's kind of a sad commentary on how we as a society view these sorts of things, because on one hand, we've got a public clamor for proof. Let's have proof. Let's see it. Let's hear about these things. We want to know. And then when the evidence comes forward from the eyewitnesses, they are immediately leaped upon and savaged and discredited. So it's why are we not collectively more open-minded about it and willing to give people the benefit of the doubt? Michael has interviewed so many people over the years. I've interviewed so many people over the years, paranormal, cryptids, UFOs, mystical experiences, and they do fall into patterns that indicate that human beings are having a variety of extraordinary alternate reality experiences throughout history. So what's going on here? What are we interacting with? It's real. And how do we understand it and turn it to our benefit?
I think a lot of people are really afraid, though, to try to understand this sort of phenomena. I mean, most people, they go through their lives asleep. They get up in the morning, they go to work, they come home, they watch television, they go back to sleep. Do they do it all over again? Anything that takes them out of that routine is scary. It frightens them. And that animal instinct comes in. You get scared of something, you either run away from it or you attack it. And I see that, time after time again when it comes to other people having these unusual experiences.
Well, that's very true. That if you acknowledge the experience, then you're forced to deal with it. And that can be a troubling thing. For example, we've got a story about 5 UFOs, including a huge circular ship that appear over a farmhouse while a family is having dinner. And there are a couple of brothers involved, mother, father, a couple of sisters, and one of the sisters has a baby. And everybody rushes outside to look, except the father, who doesn't seem to want to deal with it. It's almost like he's clinging to his dinner table. He's not going to go out and look. And he mumbles something about, it's just government stuff. But he is not going to go look. And it's almost like, well, if I go look and I see something, then I have to come to terms with it. And if I just stay here and hope that it goes away like an ostrich with its head in the sand, then I don't have to confront something that might really upset me.
So now all the stories that you two have collected in these books, and there's quite a few of them, I know that you had to weed through hundreds of others to get the ones that you actually got published. Now, how did you go through that process of picking and choosing which ones you're going to put in the book?
Well, for me, reviewing a lot of Michael's stories, some of it was, we wanted to show certain kinds of experiences. And so we do have the book divided into 4 segments. And one is I Know What I Saw. And this is a category of experiences where people have the irrefutable eyewitness event, and they suffer that derision, and they're forced back into that mantra, which has become famous in ufology now. I know what I saw. Then we have mystery lights and craft in the sky, which is a very common category of experiences. And we wanted to demonstrate what that was like and how people encountered those. And we have then encounters with aliens. We have negative abductions, a positive hybrid experience, weird experiences. We have one with some aliens who come down and they start eating grass. They have a silver plate with them. They pick up wads of grass and start eating grass, and offer that to the human who encounters them, a little girl. And so what are these encounters like, and how are people changed by them? And then we have the high strangeness aspect, missing time, portals, some of the unusual phenomena that get stirred up around. So we have far more stories than we actually used, of course. And we wanted to pick representative cases that had good evidence to them or a lot of energy to them, compelling stories, and also stories that served as good springboards for the commentaries. Because one of the things that we did in the commentaries is we looked back into the literature of other similar cases. We didn't want to just repeat cases that have been hashed over for decades, but some of those cases are classic, and the news stories, many of which are never before published, they're springboards to go back and look at those classic cases and see how they all tie in together. So it was really a synergistic mix of things. And like any book, it's an organic process. And, we toss material back and forth, and it just comes together that way.
One of the things that has always amazed me, and you'll see this in your book as you have these different categorizations, is how similar these events are. They may be separated by decades, maybe even centuries, but it's almost like these people will have the very same experiences time and time again. But then again, you'll have a few, like you said, about the creatures who have the silver plates and started eating the grass. That's a new one to me. That one's amazing. Yet, so many of these are so similar. I mean, it's almost like they're working off of a template, like a great cosmic template.
Well, there certainly is this weird trickster element to them, the bizarro nature about how nonsensical some of the aspects are. And of course, John Keel talked about those sorts of things all the time. But take the grass-eating aliens, for example. I mean, it sounds so incongruous, so illogical that a more skeptical person would just immediately write this off as some sort of daydream or made-up story or hoax or whatever. But yet, when you look at the context of other kinds of experiences, take that fellow who, I think his name was Simonton, craft came down and beings came out, and they had a jug with them, and they indicated telepathically they wanted water. So he gets them water, and then when he approaches the craft and he's able to look into it, he sees that there's this alien in front of a little gray guy in front of what looks like a barbecue grill or something, and he's making something look like pancakes, and give him some pancakes, and he eats one. And
Eagle River, Wisconsin.
Exactly. So it's the same.
Joe Symington.
Pancake serving aliens, grass eating aliens. What sort of sense do we make out of that? And the pancakes, he was able to have one of them analyzed, and it was said to have just natural earth ingredients in it. He said it was kind of dry, but nonetheless, it came from an alien. And it's these sorts of experiences that don't fit everyday logic that immediately then get discarded as weirdo, flako, off the charts, let's not even think about it material, when in fact these sorts of experiences are part of the core of experiences that people have in these alternate realities. There are other rules, Earth rules do not apply.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Joshua Cutchin wrote an entire book about the whole aspect of eating and drinking, dealing with the paranormal, extraterrestrial, alleged extraterrestrial visitations, and and it seems to me that a lot of times some of the more bizarre stories have witnesses who are the most earnest in their descriptions, and in just the final aspects of it. They're just like, hey, it happened to me, believe it or not. I'm not making any money off of this. I've got no reason to lie. There it is.
Well, Rosemary, did you find that anyone who had just gone on a normal vacation, let's say to the Great Pyramid, as an example, was wrapped up in the paranormal after that? I mean, something happened to them while they were there they weren't expecting, or certainly had no particular interest in the subject?
That happens to people all the time. They don't have to have any background in the paranormal or UFOs, any interest. Some of our storytellers make the point that I never even believed in this stuff until I had experiences. And in my view, the spontaneous one that just kind of bursts upon you is the best kind of experience to have. It's often quite profound. It's highly energetic. It's got a lot of transformative energy to it. There are seekers who will always go out and they want experiences. We have the UFO vigil people. We have the paranormal investigators. We have people who go to sacred sites and hope that they're going to contact spirits or the gods. And they can often have very profound experiences too. But to me, the most interesting ones are the ones that just pop out of the multiverse.
Yeah. And it's spontaneous.
it's the person being in a certain place, in a certain state of consciousness, and maybe they're ready for some sort of breakthrough like that. And then the multiverse just delivers something extraordinary.
I think.
I found, of course, I've been collecting all this, material too. I haven't centered on people who have just travel-related experiences, but a lot of people have gone off to a particular area, like a hotspot, and ended up seeing absolutely nothing at all. Yet people who were not predisposed to having an experience of a paranormal type would visit there, and they would suddenly find their lives turned around by this. I remember there's a fellow now deceased, Bryce Bond. He was a disc jockey here in New York. He only played jazz and Frank Sinatra records, but every once in a while he would do a public notice about one of our UFO meetings or something, And he called me one time, and he said he was going over to England. I guess he knew I had some contacts there or had been there, and he said, "Well, I have some time to kill. Can you suggest something that I might do? Spend some time at?" And I said, "Well, why don't you go visit Arthur Shuttlewood?" Now, Arthur Shuttlewood was the editor of the Warminster Journal, which was the daily newspaper out of Warminster, UK, where this town that had been besieged by the Thing. It started on Christmas Day, where a woman was walking off the church service, and she heard this sound like a 1,000 bees, buzzing overhead, and she was pushed to the sidewalk.
And Tim, I'm going to have to interrupt you here because we are at our top of the hour break. We'll continue this in just a few minutes on Exploring the Bizarre, so stay tuned.
Exploring the Bizarre. Your e-ticket ride into the world of the paranormal. Strap yourself in as we traverse the universe, exploring the unexplained. UFOs, ghosts, lost worlds, cryptozoology, as well as other dimensions. It's time to take back the night. Now, your electrifying hosts of Exploring the Bizarre, Timothy Beckley and Tim Swartz.
Welcome back to the second hour of Exploring the Bizarre. I'm Tim Swartz. Tonight we are talking with Rosemary Ellen Guiley and MICHAEL BREIN. And Tim Beckley was talking about, what was his name?
See there, I forgot. No, I'm kidding. I remember. Bryce Bond.
Well, go ahead and finish your story, Tim.
All right. Well, yes. Okay. So Bryce Bond was a disc jockey out of a small station in Long Island, and he had called me just before leaving to England, wanting to know if he might do something over there on his vacation time after he'd finished doing some business. And I suggested that he mosey on up and meet the fellow in the town of Warminster by the name of Arthur Shuttlewood, who had become the focal point of a lot of UFO activity. He had started out as a skeptical journalist, editor of the Daily Warminster Journal, and in a short period of time, he realized that something indeed strange was going on in this town. Well, now, Bryce, as I say, had a very little interest, as far as I know, in the paranormal. He was busy playing Frank Sinatra and jazz records. But he went off to England, and I found out later when he came back that he had a remarkable experience. He had met with Arthur Shuttlewood and some friends of Arthur up on either Cradle or Star Hill, which was an area where people were going to have UFO sightings on a pretty much a nightly basis at one point, and celebrities like David Bowie and Mick Jagger were coming there. And it was quite a hot spot, a window area for the paranormal. And we had people whose watches had stopped, who claimed that they were getting strange voices on the on the telephone, pretty much like John Keel ran into in Point Pleasant, West Virginia, with the appearance of the Mothman. Anyway, Bryce came back to New York a totally changed person. It seems that he had wandered off into the field by himself. He had seen some sort of flashing light. He was taken on board a craft of some sort. There were several occupants on board the ship. They were very human in appearance. They were what we would call a Nordic UFO types. I call them soap opera actors and actresses, people with chiseled faces and very smooth complexion and just almost the perfect human. Anyway, he had this experience and was on board the craft for an hour or so, except that when he came back to where where Arthur Shuttleworth and his group was, it turned out that there had been more missing time, that even though he thought he'd only been away from them from an hour, it was like 3 hours had passed or something like that. He returned from New York. He gave up his job. He went into the station manager and said that he didn't want to play Frank Sinatra records anymore. He gave up his job and became a psychic healer and a very successful lecturer on the subject. He wrote a book which we published a couple of years ago because I found this missing manuscript. It's UFOs: Keys to Inner Perfection. So here's a fellow who went off on a business trip, had some time to kill in the UK, and ended up coming back a psychic healer and quitting his job and becoming totally wrapped up in the paranormal until he passed away about maybe a decade ago. So, Michael, you were saying that you felt that the Earth was a Grand Central Station?
Yeah. When Rosemary and I were talking about this book and organizing it and thinking about the perspectives that we would cover, I had recalled, studies that you look at from MUFON and APRO and various organizations, statistics, cold statistics about, okay, what are the shapes of objects that people report they see and all that. It's very impersonal and kind of statistical. But when you're brought back down to the interaction of people as experiencers and they're telling you what they're experiencing, the statistics kind of vaporize and scatter, and you're there with these very basic experiences that people have had. And I came around to the feeling, my God, if you just consider the variety of what people have been telling us, the variety of experiences that they've had, it began to occur to me, my God, this looks more like the bar scene in Star Wars, where you had all these characters, beings of different shapes and colors and sizes, and different appendages and whatnot. So I was really beginning to think like, well, there certainly is some kind of a presence from the multiverse, and I'm not going to say that they're all space travelers, but some of them could be time travelers, different dimensions, who knows what, but there's a lot of them, and there's a lot of different kinds, even though there seems to be some commonality of experiences that are reported by people. The variety and scope of these intelligences that are interacting with us is enormous. And the only thing I can think of is it emulates a Grand Central Station. And I began to think, well, how do they all interact with one another? This is something that's totally, to use the phrase, alien to us. But some of them are probably way more advanced than others, and from different dimensions. You just wonder how they interact with one another, and do they actually divvy up planet Earth for different purposes? That kind of thinking. That's where I kind of come to from all this.
I often wondered if there actually is any interaction, or whether or not the phenomena as we see it and experience it is, and it's difficult for me to try to formulate this, but so separated that possibly they're not even aware of all the other activity that's going on. Maybe just even marginally aware that we're viewing them, because and I've talked about this in the show before. A lot of people that have talked to me have said that they will see, say like a creature or a being of some kind, just like outside of their house. And when this thing notices that it's being watched, it acts surprised. Like, yeah, it's like it's not used to somebody actually being able to see it. And gosh, so many people have told me before that whatever it is that they're looking at has a genuine look of surprise on its face. When it sees that it's being looked at. So I just wonder, what kind of interaction, if any, is actually going on.
Yeah, these are all good questions.
and that's just it. I mean, we've got all kinds of questions, but I don't really, anymore. I just don't think that we can really expect any decent answers. At least not yet.
Yeah, true. Yeah, I agree with that.
Well, Michael, I had a question here. I was just reading something that really fascinated me. That you competed in a contest in 1985 where you traveled to all of 50 states. It was a 50-state marathon on United Airlines.
Yes.
Now, you got to tell me about this. I mean, this isn't probably too paranormal, but it certainly is fascinating. Who came up with that idea, and how did you manage to accomplish that? I mean, you obviously can't go from Vermont. I don't know. That boggles the mind. How the heck long did that take?
Well, it took me 13 days of flying, if you can imagine that. 13 days. United Airlines at that time began to fly into all 50 U.S. states. So somebody there, very clever, came up with the idea, let's have a contest. And if you flew to all 50 states, either landing in or taking off from, you would earn a first-class pass for a year on United's domestic
flights. Did you
flights.
Have to pay for the? Did you pay for? Did you
well,
pay
I did.
For the ticket?
I did. Well, ticket. Talk about ticket. It was a portfolio. I found this travel agency in San Francisco. They said, we'll do it for you. And so they came up with this whole thing where, for example, I landed in Jackson, Mississippi, rented a car like at midnight, and drove to New Orleans just in time to catch the flight out of New Orleans. Barely missed it, just almost missed it.
And you managed to do all this in 13 days?
I did.
In 13 days?
13 days.
I don't know. I want to see proof of that.
No, that's funny because I ran out, got like 13 postcards in each place. I had pre-labeled mailing labels for these postcards and stamps, and I said, the rubber stamp on there, and I said, this is state number 39, and I sent it to the marketing director of United Airlines, along with friends and relatives, cousins, girlfriends, whatever. And it's funny, on the night that they gave out the awards, there were 78 winners, I believe, 78 people who accomplished this, and I was the first to complete it, because I did it faster than anybody else. And it cost me $8,000 to do. I ran into somebody who, like a New Zealander, who bought a ticket, a special promotion for $300, could fly unlimited on United in the U.S. for 1 month. And he did it for $300. And other people spent a lot more money, business people. But anyway, so
I don't think anybody.
Yeah,
nobody would even do that today.
Oh,
can you? You'd have to do it online or yourself.
Well, so the director of marketing was up there, and he was talking a little bit about each person, so on and so forth. And they said, and then there was MICHAEL BREIN, who sent me a postcard from every state, but you missed a couple of states. what happened? How come I didn't get the postcards? You know, it was just funny and all that. But that was it.
You know, just to go from California to Hawaii and back. How do you get like you have to land, step on the ground, get back on a plane, and come back?
Basically, that's it. I landed in South Dakota, and the flight was going to go to North Dakota, and there was 2 other guys sitting on the plane. We all looked at each other and smiled because we all knew we were getting that leg, North Dakota, for the contest by flying on that flight.
Well, the gods were certainly with you on that trip. I would have to say that because
after I won the pass, after I got the pass, I was living in Honolulu. I would fly to Maui by way of Los Angeles or San Francisco. Why? I was in first class. I was having a great meal, a movie, some drinks. And then from Maui, I flew back on a DC-10 from Maui to Honolulu on United, sitting in first class. I just loved traveling. I loved flying. But I went to all kinds of UFO conferences during that year. I landed in all kinds of places, went to conferences in Florida, in Michigan, California, all the major conferences because I had that pass. I have that pass, we'll travel.
Wow. Well, I give you credit to that. Would you ever do that again?
In a heartbeat, I would.
Oh, right. All right. Well, save the first class seat next to you. Save me the first class seat next to you. But I guess you didn't have any time for any paranormal experiences on that. That one. But have you ever seen a UFO?
Myself.
Have you ever seen a UFO?
No, I don't think I have personally, but I had an experience when I was like 4 or 5 years old. I remember I was in my crib and I was crying for some reason. And I looked out to my Venetian blinds in my window and I saw a green elf-looking creature come through the Venetian blinds and disappear into my toy closet. And whether I was hallucinating because I had a fever, whether I really saw something, I don't know what it was. But obviously it had affected me the rest of my life. It kind of steered me in the direction of being a little more open to things. I'm sure it affected me. I don't know what it was.
So now you've acted as an ambassador for MUFON. Have you investigated any of the hardcore cases that we know about, or cases that in your mind really stand out?
Well, I was involved in as state director for MUFON for Hawaii. I got involved in a lot of investigation of sightings and this and that, and some of the stories that appear in our book came from my interviews of people that had remarkable, outstanding cases in Hawaii, no doubt.
Well, you know, UFOs, of course, are part of the Hawaiian shamanic past. I've been on, I guess it was Mysteries and the National Parks, and it was a segment about UFOs in Hawaii that are seen coming out of the volcano there.
Yes, Haleakala on Maui is the scene of many sightings. Why? Well, the sky is crystal clear late at night from the altitude that you're in. You have a huge view of the sky, and people do have experiences, and some of them may be connected mystically to Maui, and others may be that they simply have exposure to more possibilities looking at the night skies. But I want to tell you, I've had cases, for example, and one of these is in our book, of a Harvard PhD faculty member at the University of Hawaii who had his experience in Honolulu of seeing a craft just go right overhead from a golf course over the highway into the mountains. He had a witness in the car with him. He is as credible as you can get. And that got him absolutely on a path to read hundreds of books and come to meetings and discussion groups, and became a good friend and shared his experiences. There are many people in Hawaii that have regular UFO experiences like anybody else elsewhere that are not necessarily mystically oriented. Former flight attendants, like I said, a PhD faculty member at the University of Hawaii, people on boats offshore. Hawaii seemed to be kind of a hotbed for sightings over the years, no doubt.
Yet it doesn't seem to get that much attention in the media. Now, I remember there's a celebrity, and maybe you can remember Tim, his name. He was on Hee Haw, Artie Johnson.
Okay. Oh no, he was on Laughing.
Laughing. Okay. That's well, right. All right. I got my program wrong. But anyway, we used to speak. I remember when I was interviewing people for the tabloids, and he had regular sightings on Hawaii. I mean, but he didn't tie them in with necessarily with interplanetary, starships. He saw them more in the sense of a cultural phenomena. But these things were coming down. They were smaller than the motherships and Close Encounters, but they were coming down and actually lighting in people's trees and landing on their roofs, and I think in a couple of occasions coming down, chimneys or through open windows. And people said, "Oh, it's ball lightning or something," but it didn't act like ball lightning because, as far as we know, ball lightning, is a short-term phenomena, and not like these objects would. And some people would have sightings on a regular basis. And then, of course, you have the story of the Menehune, which I've written up in. I have a book that I did years ago that actually did very well selling to the tourist trade there. Kahuna Power. It's still in print. And we talked about the Menehune, and some folk believe that they may be extraterrestrial. These were the little people that seemed to inhabit the island for a while, and they built their own roads and their own dams and their own little places to live in and so forth. Have you heard of those stories?
Well, I heard, many Hawaiian mythological legend stuff, but I didn't hear too much of that, connecting it with, let's just say, UFO sightings, that nature. But but Hawaii is really steeped in what you're saying, these legends, and there are people have had paranormal events as well as, like you say, ufological or other kinds of phenomena. No question about it. Hawaii does have that kind of mysticism from the past, but it really did have over the years many people citing objects, UFOs, because, I mean, you're right out there in the middle of the Pacific, and the skies are just black, other than just the lights from Honolulu, and so the opportunity to see and experience things is probably better there than it is for places saturated with life and people and busyness of cities. No question about it.
Well, you've got it seems like you've got a lot more going on than just delicious Kona coffee.
Absolutely.
I would say.
No question about it.
Well, so Tim, you were telling me before you had some things you wanted to ask Rosemary about travel.
Well, yeah, we've only got about 2 minutes before our bottom of the hour break, so we can't get too much into this, but we'll start this and then we'll continue it on into the next segment after the breaks. But Rosemary, I mean, I know that you have traveled extensively, in your life. I mean, what about you? I mean, have you had any unusual experiences when you go on your walkabouts?
I certainly have, Tim, and I haven't traveled as extensively as Michael. He hit at least 100 countries in his travels. But I've spent a great deal of time in England and Europe, Canada. I've been to Australia. I've been to Asia and Russia. And being interested in these topics, I am a seeker, so I often go looking for experiences. I want to go to places that are haunted. I want to go to sacred sites, and I prep myself, hoping to have some kind of, extraordinary experience. And many times I do, and sometimes I don't. And it's true that sometimes the harder you look for it, the more elusive it is. But I've also had experiences that just sort of burst on you spontaneously. And sometimes those are the most powerful and the most significant. So I'd be happy to share an example of that or so when we come back from the break, if we're just about to head out here.
Oh, definitely. We'll definitely pick this up when we come back. And so, Tim, it is time for our bottom of the hour break. So we'll go and take this. And when we come back, we will continue our conversation about strange travels with Mike and Rosemary. So stay tuned for more Exploring the Bizarre.
Yeah, I got my walking shoes on.
Now back to Exploring the Bizarre with two of the most electrifying researchers in the paranormal, your hosts, Timothy Beckley and Tim Swartz.
Tim, such a fun show tonight. I'm learning so much.
Indeed, I feel like I'm floating up. We don't need no airplane to fly it. I'm floating on air.
Before we had to go to our break, Rosemary was going to tell us some interesting stories on her own. So, Rosemary, please continue.
Well, I wanted to share a spontaneous experience that I had while traveling, and I was a speaker at a conference in Montreal. This was the International Integral Institute for Human Sciences. And it was a fairly big conference. I was one of the visiting faculty. I'd never been to Montreal before. I was quite excited about it. And the whole experience started when I ran into PMH Atwater in the ladies' room on the Sunday of the weekend. And PMH Atwater is an internationally known expert on near-death experience. And she said, hey, how'd you like to play hooky today and go see the Black Coffin? And I had no idea. I'd never heard of the Black Coffin. But when she explained to me what it was and why it was significant, I was intrigued. And so I said, sure. I was up for an adventure. Now, I had always been interested in the literature of the saints, and in fact, I've done an encyclopedia on the saints and their relics and miracles. But the short of it is that the Black Coffin is a black marble coffin where an individual named Frère André, Brother André, is buried in this huge oratory dedicated to his patron saint, Saint Joseph. And millions of pilgrims from around the world come to the oratory to pray for healing, because Frère André was a healer. And the walls are covered with crutches and canes and things that people have had spontaneous healings, and they've been able to abandon them on the spot. And Frère André is buried there in this huge black coffin, and people come and pray at the coffin for healing. Now, I didn't know anything about Frère André. I'd never been to the oratory, but it sounded like an interesting experience. So several of us trooped off and joined a huge throng of pilgrims who were coming there on Sunday for a healing. And a line snaked quite a ways out, people waiting to come and touch the coffin. So as PMH Atwater explained to me, she said, you can pray for anything at the coffin. People usually touch it and ask Frère André to intercede for them in some way, and it's usually for a healing purpose. So I had no healing purpose that I needed, but when I got up to the coffin, I placed my hands on it, and I was immediately swept up into this energy that I can only describe as a mystical experience, and very similar to what the saints describe as raptures, where they feel they are swept up by a fiery energy. And it was a fiery energy. I felt like divine fire I was surrounded by it and permeated by it, and I was pulled up into this divine presence. And this fiery energy was like peeling away layers of junk, energetic junk that I didn't need anymore. It really was an energetic healing. And I felt that I was in the presence of something supreme and transcendent and divine that I couldn't even put words onto. And it shook me to the core of my being. And I don't know how long I stood there at the coffin. There was such a press of people behind me, many other pilgrims who wanted their turn to touch the coffin. And so I moved off then. And I was literally in tears. And I went into a little nearby chapel and just sat and shook and cried and prayed at what I had experienced. It was so unexpected. And I didn't feel that I had been like anointed, appointed, purified, or whatever, but something had peeled off of me in this divine fire. And it was through the intercession of Frere Andre. Well, this stimulated me to look into the background of Frere Andre, and I wound up putting him in the encyclopedia, even though he's never even made it to, he's not beatified, he's not canonized. And in fact, he was not well regarded by his own order, the Congregation of the Holy Cross. He was an uneducated man who wanted to dedicate himself to the service of the church. And he had to beg his way into this Congregation of the Holy Cross. And they finally took pity on him and said, well, he could be a doorkeeper. That was his job. But Frere Andre had an unusual healing ability, and this was discovered by people. And he could lay hands on people and heal them. He could heal them by word, very much in the style of Jesus. And it was quite profound. And so pretty soon he was going out into the community off hours when he wasn't working, and he was ministering to people. Well, sadly, this did not sit well with the authorities of the congregation, because who was this lowly doorkeeper going out and healing people? You know, he wasn't even, sanctioned to do this by the congregation or the church. But popularity won out. He acquired such a following that the congregation could no longer ignore this. And so they started giving him greater status and latitude. And he wound up convincing the order and the institution of the Catholic Church to build this oratory. He said his healing power came from his patron saint, Saint Joseph, the father of Jesus. And he convinced them to build this very impressive oratory in Montreal. And so that's the place that's there. And it was just out of the blue, something I wasn't looking for, wasn't expecting, never thought something like that would happen to me. And yet I seemed to be in the right place at the right time. Now, I was active on the visiting faculty for the Institute for a number of years, and so I made other trips back to Montreal to teach at the conferences. And every time I went, I always went to the oratory, and I would touch the black coffin, and I would pray in the chapel, and I never had another experience like that. And that's the way it is with mystical experiences. They do not repeat. You get what you need from it, and then maybe you have other experiences that are significant, but you're not going to get the same experience again.
That's fascinating that, you would have the one experience, like you said, and then never again. Does that happen with other people, that they will have one epiphany, so to speak, and then that's it?
Well, it does. And, like I said, maybe they go and they have other experiences that are meaningful in extraordinary ways. But I did a book on miracles. In fact, I did a couple of books on miracles, Develop Your Miracle Mind Consciousness and A Pocket Full of Miracles. And I interviewed a lot of people about their miraculous and transcendent and mystical experiences. Same thing. They would describe these spontaneous experiences that were so wonderful, so rapturous, and they would want to have them again and try and recreate the circumstances for it, and it just wouldn't happen. But when you have experiences like this, any sort of extraordinary experience, whether it's a paranormal or seeing a craft or aliens or a mystical uprush, it does open you to other kinds of experiences. It retunes your consciousness wiring. And so then you are more predisposed to have other kinds of experiences. And I think this is a snowball effect.
You know, your experience reminds me a lot of something that happened to me years ago when I was in Egypt. I was traveling with a group of U.S. government officials, and we were given a tour, an early morning tour of the Great Pyramid there on the Giza Plateau. And our tour guide was a Egyptian government official, not a regular tour guide. And when we were in the King's Chamber, this government guide encouraged me to try to lay down in the sarcophagus. That's it's nothing more than a granite box and very short. I mean, you really have to kind of bend your legs to get into it. When I got into it, I had this experience that I still have trouble describing it because it seemed almost like that I lived another life in ancient Egypt, that I lived this entire lifetime in just like a half a second that I was lying down in this sarcophagus. And then when I was taken out of it, I basically forgot most of it. I was left with an impression, and every once in a while I'll get a fleeting memory of what happened, but that was it. And it was the most unusual thing that ever happened to me, and frustrating at the same time, because the memory is there. It's hard to describe. It's there, but it's not.
Well, that's interesting, and I've heard similar accounts about that sarcophagus. I've been there myself, and I also laid in the sarcophagus, and I can only describe it, and I think you've just validated it for me, that it must be some sort of time machine. Mm-hmm. Because as soon as I laid down in it, I felt immediately pulled back into the past, and it was Egypt, and I had this recollection of having lived there in the past. Now, someone could say, well, this is projection. You go to Egypt, a lot of people think they have past lives in Egypt, and you're inside the pyramids. So, but I don't think that's the case. Too many people have had similar experiences like that. And there may be something about the energy in that pyramid and that particular the sarcophagus there that opens that portal for people. And maybe not everybody has that experience, but enough people do. So that's really interesting validation for me.
Yeah, well, I mean, out of our entire group, I was the only one, at least as far as I know. Nobody else ever, described having a similar experience. I was the only one in the group that had something like that. Everybody else just, got in, got out, and that was it. So yeah, it's just one of the more bizarre experiences that I ever had. So when it comes to having these kinds of experiences, Michael, does somebody have to travel halfway around the world to seek out these things, or can they just find interesting things in their own state?
I think from people who have kind of morphed from being tourists to travelers, that is, people who get more deeply involved in the experience of traveling and get involved with the cultures and develop memorable experiences, like the people that they meet, that they connect with, and have these more genuine connection types of experiences, they can bring this back. And the more experience you get with traveling, the more you can bring back with you the great things that you've experienced over there. It becomes more of your experience supplanting your mundane, boring, typical life. And that's a benefit of travel. So I would say that you could probably have more paranormal and unusual experiences. The more experienced as a traveler you are, and the more you come back and kind of integrate all this growth that you had back into your own home situation. Yes, it can expand you and open you up to more possibilities.
Mm-hmm. What about just traveling in general? I mean, it seems that we have the ability now just to get onto a jet plane and fly basically anywhere on this planet. So I mean, if somebody is wanting to do something like that, what's your suggestions? I mean, what does a person need to do to go on? It doesn't even have to be like a paranormal trip. Just something interesting and get them out of their comfort zone, so to speak.
It's almost leave your devices at home. Don't leave home without leaving them. No, I'm just being a little facetious. We used to go, and see the world through our camera lenses. Now we do it through our iPhones. And I joke around with people. People say, "Oh, I want to go to Paris and sit in the cafe and talk to a Parisian and really interact and connect and all that." And you go to Paris, you sit at Starbucks there, and everybody, including the French, are staring at their cell phones. The same thing. But the idea is that when you go to explore and travel and seek out novelty and have new experiences, you can't run on automatic. You really have to run on all cylinders. You have to be more alert. You have to be more open and let things happen to you and just see more, look and see, listen and hear, and just dive into the experiences which will be coming from you from all directions very intensely, and you'll have all this new novelty and stimuli. Be open to it, absorb it, and grow with it. That's what I say.
Mm-hmm. What would you say? What would you say, Michael? Are the top the 3 or 4 places to visit where people are having paranormal? Is it still Sedona? I mean, what are the top places where people are reporting back to you?
I think countries that have really old histories, like Central Europe and France and England, that have such long histories of people throughout the ages. You don't just tap into a modern development. You get to experience cultures that have been around and evolving for centuries. So you have a lot of history. You have a lot of psychic energy in a lot of places. But I'd say, almost if I had to pick one area of the world where it seems like people seem to have more unusual paranormal kinds of experiences, I would have to say the United Kingdom in my mind, and also Ireland. To my way of thinking.
Well, of course, if you want to go check out Loch Ness, you've got probably 9 or 10 hours of the most beautiful scenic route from London on to Scotland. I took the night train to Inverness, and you wake up in the morning and there's all this lush, glorious greenery and little ponds and lakes and streams and things that you go by. I have to say that at least when I went in the 80s, that to me was the most glorious site I guess I had ever laid eyes on. And of course, I did have that experience near Stonehenge of signaling to what might have been a UFO and getting a response, and having traveled and spoken to my friend Brinsley Laporte Trench, who was the 8th Earl of Clancarty, and we had a little unofficial meeting there at the House of Lords in front of about 100 members of Parliament, and of course, people were, on their way up to Loch Ness were having all sorts of experiences, and some people were getting the opportunity to see Nessie, or at least thinking that they had seen.
And now we are setting our sights on the stars. It's built into us. We're hardwired to do this, and we have insatiable curiosity. And at least Rosemary and I, through our books, and you also with all your endeavors, we're all on the road to strange together.
Well, we are. Well, we're closing in on the midnight hour, and we do, Tim, as usual, want to go one last time around the table here, so that we can ask our guests what they're working on currently and how our listeners can get in touch with them and become involved in the experience. I guess that's the best way I could describe it. So why don't we start out with Rosemary? Give it a shot. Rosemary, tell us what you're doing, because I know you're always busy.
I always have a number of books in the works. I've just put the finishing touches on Guide to Psychic Protection, which will be out later this year. I think it's going to be my 67th or 68th book. And I've just launched a new website for my publishing company, Visionary Living Publishing, which is part of Visionary Living, Inc. And that's at www.visionarylivingpublishing.com. You can see Michael's bio up there, information about our book, all the other books and authors that I publish. It's
now who are you publishing beside? What have you got in the works from other authors?
I have paranormal people. I have psychics and mediums. I've got English psychics and mediums I just published, very well known over there, Stuart James and Foy and Dean James Foy, Carl Petrie, who's a psychic medium here in America. My new book just launched today, Sue Maizano, who's a healer. The Healing Journey just came out. I've co-authored books with John Zaffis and Rick Fisher and Darren Evans. I've got a Bigfoot book coming out from Paul Johnson. A lot of people in the fields of body, mind, spirit, and the paranormal. I have 25 titles out to date, and plan a publishing program of, a modest 6 to 10 titles a year.
Yeah, modest indeed. But do keep us informed, because that sounds like some of these authors would be ripe for an interview on exploring the bizarre by all means. So you're taking a lot under your hat these days, and I know you have a monthly newsletter you put out. And you have your own show.
Well, Strange Dimensions Radio is in hiatus right now. It was on KGRA, and I took it off the air because I thought that I might want to do podcasting instead, something that I could have a little more control over content and timing and things like that. So I'm still looking at various options for that, and meanwhile investing a lot of time in building up the publishing company.
Mm-hmm. Well, indeed. And your the sites again on the internet?
VisionaryLiving.com is my personal site, and VisionaryLivingPublishing.com is the book site.
All right. Well, we've got a couple of minutes left here. We need to go to Michael here, Tim.
Absolutely.
So the paranormal and ufology were a subset of the thousands of stories I collected. I have a new book just about ready to come out in days called Travel Tales, Women Alone, The Me Too of Travel. I put together about 100 accounts of women dealing with sexual harassment and assaults and surviving them. And I hope it's a landmark book, because these are real cases of travelers that I've come across. I'm now ready.
That is certainly timely in today's climate. You should certainly get on some of these talk shows that are on TV, and cable all day long, because it's certainly a subject that the people are into these days, especially
really.
women, of course. Yeah, and how about as far as your paranormal writing goes?
Well, Rosemary and I are going to talk about another book. We're going to work on our third in the series.
All right, we're out of time, guys. Good night. Thank you for being with us.
Happy traveling. Happy trails to you.
You've been listening to Exploring the Bizarre with hosts Timothy Beckley and Tim Swartz. They're taking back the night by jetting non-stop across the cosmos in search of the truly bizarre and totally unexplained, with you as their co-pilot. Thursday nights at 7 p.m. Pacific, 10 p.m. Eastern, on the KCOR Digital Radio Network. For more information on Exploring the Bizarre and hosts Timothy Beckley and Tim Swartz, check out their KCOR Digital Radio Network page. Follow their YouTube channel at MRUFO 1100. Exploring the Bizarre.